Welcome to Zoom In, Zoom Out, your global look at news from Taiwan. I'm Jeremy Olivier. It's been nearly 5 decades since the US Congress passed the Taiwan Relations Act, the piece of legislation that would go on to govern and define the strong, unofficial US-Taiwan relationship in the absence of formal ties. In the months before its passing, though, it wasn't completely certain whether those ties would be as strong as they are today. It was thanks in large part to a group of Americans then living and working in Taiwan that the country was able to navigate the loss of recognition by its most important ally. Now, one of those people was Robert Parker, who was then the head of the American Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan. In a new book titled Derecognition, Mr. Parker details the work he helped spearhead to shape the Taiwan Relations Act and ensure that US interests in Taiwan would continue to be protected. And we're very happy to have him on the show today. Robert, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
I just want to start off with some scene setting. US President Jimmy Carter has just announced that the US is going to switch recognition from the Republic of China, Taiwan, to the People's Republic of China. What's happening in Taiwan at this time, and what are you doing?
Well, to back up just a few hours, the evening before was the evening of the American Chamber of Commerce Christmas Ball, which was one of the big social events of the year. And the American ambassador, Lynn Unger, was our guest of honor and was actually dancing at the Christmas ball when a call came in from Washington. And one of the aides came in, whispered in his ear, and he turned to me and said, "Excuse me, I have to go, it's very important." He was gone for 45 minutes, came back, and then said he had to leave for the evening. And we turned to one another, a couple of the other people on the board and I, and said, "What do you think has just happened?" And I said, "Probably derecognition, but we'll find out in the morning," and we certainly did. So the next morning, we turned on the American military radio station AFNT, Armed Forces Network Taiwan, and heard Jimmy Carter make the live announcement of recognition and normalization of relations with the PRC and the termination of official relations with Taiwan. It came as a shock because nothing had really prepared us for what we, on the one hand, knew was going to happen in one way or another, but the terms and the form in which that took, the total break in official relations, the absence of the things that we had assumed would occur, that perhaps the embassy in Taipei would be switched with the embassy in Beijing, and the liaison office in Beijing would become the liaison office in Taipei, or that Taipei would acquire consular status and be a consulate like Hong Kong, or even the adoption of an older American diplomatic tradition called a legation as a way of continuing official relations. But a total break in official relations and the sudden withdrawal of the embassy, the military, the English language military radio station, all of it came as a real shock.
Well, why do you think the Carter administration was willing to cut ties so suddenly and without kind of giving prior notice to the Taiwanese government?
Part of it, I think, was Carter's naivete in foreign policy. He didn't have a background in foreign affairs. And the other part of it was domestic politics. The fact that Carter and his team knew that there was a great deal of support in Taiwan, for Taiwan, in the Congress. And they were afraid of opposition to the announcement before it was a fait accompli. As it turned out, the fact that they ignored not only us, the Americans in Taiwan, and the American people, but also the American Congress, ultimately worked to our advantage because Congress was offended by being left out, and it made them very receptive to the recommendations that we made for continuing the relationship on an unofficial basis.
You went to Washington to testify in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Can you talk a little bit about what your demands were?
Yes, we had to first deal with the Omnibus bill and attack it, show why it was deficient, and then take the positive side and make the proposals for what we felt was needed in the legislation.
So how receptive was the Foreign Relations Committee to the demands that you brought them?
They were very receptive. They needed to know what, they wanted to respond strongly, but how to respond and what the terms should be. So when the testimony was given, it turned out that the other witnesses largely concentrated on geopolitical factors, philosophical approaches, historical analogies and the like. And it was us, the American Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan, that focused on the practical and legal issues that would apply. The existence of diplomatic relations with a friendly country under US law carried with it many legal consequences under American law. And it was unprecedented for the United States to break diplomatic relations with a friendly country. In the past, we'd only done that with enemy countries. And suddenly to have all of those things that flowed automatically under US law from the existence of formal diplomatic relations with a friendly country had been swept away. And so in my research for my testimony, I focused on those legal consequences of the existence of official diplomatic relations and the essence of recognizing sovereignty under US law, and wove that into the recommendations that I made, to which the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was very receptive.
And how many of those asks ended up in the final piece of legislation?
Well, it wasn't 100%, but it was close. I'd say 80%.
And among that 80%, what do you think was the most important?
If I had to single out one, it would be that the Omnibus bill proposed by the administration did not deal with the fact that Taiwan had a government. They simply referred to the people on Taiwan.
Yeah, very interesting legalese.
Yeah. And so insisting that there had to be a definition in the Taiwan Relations Act that linked that to the government on Taiwan, I think was the most important. And Congress agreed. So that was done. But there were also a wide number of very important issues that had simply been left out of the administration's proposal. For example, what about all of the existing treaties and agreements between the United States and the ROC? Well, Jimmy Carter had said they'll continue in effect, but their proposed legislation didn't say that. So I insisted that that had to be addressed, and Congress agreed and wrote that into the Taiwan Relations Act. The recognition of Taiwan law in American courts, the standing of Taiwan companies to sue and be sued in American courts, the recognition of sovereign immunity for the government in Taiwan, and so on. All of those were important points that needed to be added, and thanks to Congress, they were.
It was also a bit more muscular in terms of the guarantee of supplying Taiwan with defense articles.
Yes.
Post-recognition.
We emphasized that security for Taiwan and for American businesses in Taiwan was a business issue as well as just a policy matter for the United States. And that in order for there to be security, there had to be the ability of Taiwan to acquire defensive weapons to defend itself. And Congress fully agreed with that.
And my purpose in being with you today is to point out those areas in which I feel that the normalization policy and the omnibus legislation proposed by the administration is deficient, and to offer concrete suggestions for curing those deficiencies. Part of doing business and doing it successfully is having certainty. Business thrives on certainty. And no element of certainty is more important than one's physical security. And so obtaining a strong security resolution from this committee, from the Congress, is indeed important.
So even after your testimony, your work wasn't completely done, right? over the next year, and actually in some cases several years, you embarked on a series of projects back here in Taiwan. Can you talk a little bit about what those projects were?
They had to do with the institutions that were really vital to everyday life for Americans in Taiwan. Things like the American School, the American Club, the Youth Activities Program, but also, very importantly, the English language radio station. And all of them, we found out somewhat to our surprise, really depended upon the existence of formal diplomatic relations, which has just been ended, and specifically the Mutual Defense Treaty, under which there was another agreement called the Status of Forces Agreement. And all of those institutions really had their legal foundation on that military structure, which was suddenly yanked away. So we had to create new institutions and new bases legally for each of those.
Another project that required work both in Washington and here was the establishment of the American Institute in Taiwan, which is now, of course, the US's de facto embassy here. Can you tell me a little bit about the challenges of having that come to fruition as well?
From the get-go, there was a big challenge in that it had never been done before. We had never had a so-called private sector corporation act in the place of an embassy to carry out American relations with another country. So that all had to be done from the get-go. Where we were fortunate, and I have to say that we, Americans in Taiwan, were very skeptical about that. But what really made the difference was the quality of the men who took the key positions at AIT from the very beginning. Charles Cross, who was the first director of AIT in Taiwan, and David Dean, who was the chairman of AIT in Washington, were outstanding. And they initially, although well known to the leadership of Taiwan's government, were nonetheless received with some reservation and resentment to Carter's policy. But they proceeded to act with such integrity and decency and respect toward Taiwan that they won everybody over.
So 2 decades later, in the year 2000, you were bestowed the Order of the Brilliant Star by then President Lee Teng-hui. It's Taiwan's highest civilian honor, and it's rarely given to foreigners. How did it feel to receive that kind of recognition for the work that you'd done?
Well, I think it was the greatest honor of my life. But I also believe very strongly that it was not just personal for me. It really was recognition of the American Chamber of Commerce and the people in AmCham who worked together to accomplish those results. I'm always be grateful to President Lee Teng-hui. I had known him since he was mayor of Taipei, and then governor of Taiwan province, and then vice president, and then president. And so we had a personal relationship, but also there in the year 2000, when he gave me that award, it was 20 years after the events of 1979, 1980. And so there was enough of a history to say that, yeah, all of these things worked.
Rob, thanks so much for your insights. This was a really great conversation. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, Jeremy, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for watching Zoom In, Zoom Out. If you liked today's episode, please remember to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. I'm Jeremy Olivier. Take care, and see you next time.